Remember that one time when an army of the Confederacy attacked Vermont? Welcome to American Esoterica. If history class gives you the long list of chores that need to get done around the house, this is the not doing any of them on your day off. The essential stuff in between. The personalities, events, and other ephemera that shape our history and culture. I'm Brian Powers. There's a spot on the Gettysburg battlefield that is referred to as the high water mark of the Confederacy, the furthest north the Confederate forces pushed during the battle. It occurred during Pickett's charge, and we generally accept it as the northernmost advance of the Confederacy, except that the Confederacy tried another move altogether that might have changed the course of the war entirely, and relied on a gambit from much further north. North of the North, as it were. The war was going poorly for the South. Sherman was setting fire to everything from Atlanta to the ocean, while Grant chased Lee all over the map. The South needed a win, but it also needed a winning strategy, and nothing was out of bounds. Desperate, Jefferson Davis secretly dispatched turncoat Alabama Senator C.C. Clay to Canada, where he was to pull together Confederate sympathizers and raise sentiment in favor of the South. Once he had assembled some parties, the plan called for brazen cross-border raids. The goals were manifold. First, the South really needed the money, so raids were above all a practical form of desperation. Second, if they made enough noise at the border, the Union Army would have to peel off troops to send far away from the front, easing the pressure on Lee's army and weakening Union forces as they thinned. Third, frustrated Northerners who never expected to be in the fight would grow increasingly angry with the continued war and press for a quick end. And finally, bands of Union soldiers or Northern militias streaming across the border to chase retreating raiders might incense Canada and Britain enough to come off the sidelines in alignment with the Confederacy. There was almost nothing to lose. Almost. The man chosen for the job of raiding the first test city was Bennett Young, a 21-year-old former prisoner of war looking for some payback. Young hailed from the bustling metropolis of Nicholasville, Kentucky, a city your host spent an unfortunate 16 years inhabiting before getting released for good behavior. Young had learned at the feet of the gold standard of Confederate raiders, John Hunt Morgan, known as the Thunderbolt of the Confederacy, and was captured during the Battle of Buffington Island, Ohio. Incidentally, Morgan's raid officially ended not long after this battle at Salineville, Ohio, and this was the furthest north that uniformed Confederates officially came during the war as part of hostilities. Young eventually escaped from a prison camp near Chicago and joined the massing group of Confederates organized in Canada. He let the go do some Confederate stuff like run blockades, but was reposted to Canada, where he planned a daring raid on the very heart and soul of northern states. That's right, St. Albans, Vermont. This raid would be the test of their strategy. Senator Clay gave him the go-ahead to try, and a few days later, on October 10, 1864, Young arrived in the sleepy Vermont town of 4,000. Over the next week and a half, around 20 other secret Confederates came to St. Albans, all pretending to be vacationing Canadians. Young and his men surveyed the town from top to bottom, especially the banks and, allegedly, some of the women. They also made forays into other local towns, and Young visited the home of Vermont's governor, where he was given a tour by the governor's wife. It probably would have been a different kind of tour if she had known that he intended to burn the place down. After casing the place for 9 days, at 3 p.m. on October 19th, Young stepped onto a hotel porch on Main Street, pulled his pistol out, and yelled, "I'm an officer of the Confederate Service. I'm going to take this town and shoot the first person that resists." The townsfolk thought he was kidding until other men with guns showed up to herd them onto the village green. Meanwhile, several of Young's other compatriots were hard at work robbing every bank in town in a coordinated fashion. All three banks were near the town common and fairly close together, so it was a compact operation. Things were running relatively smoothly for the raiders to that point, but plans tend to fall apart fairly quickly. In one of the banks, the raiders encountered bureaucratic resistance from a bank manager who wished to inventory the theft as it was an act of war to be reimbursed by the government, not a robbery. While the raiders stared down administrative steadfastness, there was a knock at the door, which turned out to be a local merchant wanting to make a deposit. One of the raiders pressed his gun to the man's head and said, "I take deposits," before relieving the man of a bag of money and shoving him into a room with bank employees. Gunfire rang out somewhere outside, so the raiders decided to cut their losses and leave, accidentally leaving behind some of their ill-gotten gains in the process. At that bank, they left at a net negative, forgetting behind more money than they actually stole. The gunfire was a disappointing development as well. Young had figured it would take them no more than 30 minutes to clean out and clear out of St. Albans, and that there wouldn't be any armed resistance. He thought wrong. Someone was now shooting at the raiders from some building on Main Street, and Young began to panic. One man came out of his photography studio and, unaware of what was taking place, asked Young, "What are you trying to celebrate here?" Full of 80s movies one-liners, Young answered, "I'll let you know," and fired his gun at the man, just missing his head, which was kind of dumb, considering that Young only had but the 2 pistols, each with only 6 shots, and he was now down to only 8 bullets loaded. Seeing the situation only going further south and with the 3 banks already robbed, or whatever the opposite is when you leave more money than you take, Young decided that now was the time to burn it all down. For this portion of their devious plan, they relied on Greek fire, kind of like a Molotov cocktail that was supposed to catch fire when the jar of the substance was opened. They hurled these at their multiple targets, which did not catch fire. Between the gunfire and the lack of fire, the situation soon became clear to a greater swath of the townfolk, and one of them, a local livery owner, grabbed a gun to shoot at Young. It failed to fire, and Young laughed and cried out, "Fetch me some spurs!" The man instead ran to some nearby workers, shouting that the town was under attack. 2 men grabbed their guns and snuck up on the raiders, who caught them at the last minute, firing at them before they could get off a shot. One was lucky, but another, E.J. Morrison, would be the only fatality of the entire incident. That's also how, in a fit of unbelievable coincidence, the Confederate raiders managed to kill off the town's sole Confederate sympathizer. That's when George Conger came running up. Mr. Conger, or should we say Captain George Conger, ran into Young, who immediately recognized the soldier in the man in front of him and tried to take him prisoner. Conger was a former Union officer who had been wounded in the Second Battle of Bull Run and returned to St. Albans to care for his wife when his service was over. Which is to say that, no, Conger was not taken prisoner, but instead escaped Young and rallied the townsfolk, yelling, "Bring your guns and fight!" The raiders fled the town, trying once again to set Greek fire to the bridge behind them without success. They didn't even get to not burn the governor's house down. Captain Conger had assembled a posse of 50 men, and they gave chase to Young and his raiders, who made off with a very hefty sum of $208,000. Word had made it to Canada ahead of the raiders, so Canadian constables joined Conger's group at the border. 14 of the raiders were caught within 24 hours, including Young. Although they only ever recovered $87,000 of the money, and nobody ever really faced punishment, as every court that tried them claimed to have no jurisdiction. Still, the raid, such as it was a bust, and the aftermath was a mess. Even though it did earn some money for the South, the majority of its personnel were captured, and Canada did get off the fence, posting militia at the border to prevent Confederate raids. Young went overseas for a while, but came back to his home state of Kentucky to practice law in Louisville, where he died in 1919. A Confederate until the end, his epitaph reads, "I have kept the faith." And that is the story of how the Confederate Army led the northernmost land action of the Civil War in St. Albans, Vermont. This has been American Esoterica. All sounds were made by me, Brian Powers. Did I get it wrong? Did I get it right? Just want to talk about how good maple syrup is? Drop me a note. The address is yell@americanesoterica.com. More information on the show can be found at americanesoterica.com. Thank you for listening, and God bless America. Still rolling, rolling, rolling. Rolling, rolling, rolling. Yes.